Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, February 19th, and we will hear the presentation, Resilience in Vulnerable Communities. And my internet's a little funky. I'm not where I normally am, so bear with me if there's any issues, or sometimes I think my slides might be a little slow. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in your GoToWebinar tool panel. For your content questions related to the presentation, again, just type those in that chat box, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. Coming up next is a list of our sponsoring APA chapters and divisions for 2021. Thanks to all those participating sponsors for making these webcasts possible and free to members. Today's sponsor is the APA Housing and Community Development Division. Thanks to them for sponsoring. This is actually, I think, part 3 of a series of webcasts, maybe part 2, of a series of webcasts put on by the Housing and Community Development Division. So we thank you for bringing these great sessions to us. The session has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing. You can record your credits by heading over to planning.org, logging into your MyAPA account, and from there you can either search by today's title or event number, both of which can be found on our webcast webpage. Make sure you like us on Facebook. Just search Planning Webcast Series will pop up. That's where I post any important, timely information like a date or a time change. I'll also post when we have new webcasts available for you to register for. So be sure to like us there and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Again, just search Planning Webcasts and we'll pop up. We record all of our sessions and post them on our YouTube channel. We have over 300 recorded sessions. So be sure to subscribe and join over 3,000 folks to get up-to-date information when we post a session recording. And as always, you can register for all of our upcoming sessions. Oops, one of my slides went away. Not sure where it went. You can register for all of our upcoming sessions at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. We do have quite a few in the works. We have, I think, 4 or 5 available now for registration through the end of February and in March. So be sure to head over to our webcast webpage to get all that information. We also have 2 distance education on-demand sessions available, one for ethics, one for law, to get those requirements if you need them for AICP. They're good to view these sessions at your leisure through the end of 2021 so you can get those credits if you need them. Okay. So with that is the end of my housekeeping items. I am going to physically turn it over to you, Jamie, but verbally turn it over to you, Sheryse, to kick us off. We're so excited to have you both. Jamie, the controls are yours, and I'm going to bug out of here for a while. And again, type your questions in the chat box as you think of them, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. All right, Sheryse, it's all you.
Give me just 1 second. GoToWebinar is a little different than other entities with this presentation. All right. Apologize for the technical difficulties.
Did you get, Jamie, did you get my notification, the little pop-up that says you've been made presenter?
Yes, but it wants it to be on my actual iPad, and it's on a network, so I have to email it to myself so I can have access to it.
Okay. Believe it or not, folks, we really did do a test of the system. At the last moment, we switched folks who were going to be controlling the slides. So just bear with us for a moment. while we're waiting, I'm getting some questions in. I guess folks must have popped in after I said it. This session has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing, and we are recording the session. We'll post it up on our YouTube channel at the conclusion today. And we do have a new webcast website. And I'm getting someone asking if the on-demand sessions are good for 2020 or 2021. I thought I typed in 2021, but maybe that's an error. I will have to go look at our new website to make sure. We do have 2 on-demand sessions that are available through the end of this year, one for ethics, one for law. So at the conclusion of the webcast, I'll jump on our website and make sure that it's the correct year. And if you are seeing our old website, you might have to delete your cache and your cookies. I did notice that a few people typed in saying, it looks the same to me. No, it's very different. Jamie, where are we at?
Unfortunately, I can't get access to it. Do you have the presentation? It's not letting me get it out of my network.
Okay. Let me see if I can
pull it up to my email, but it's very large, and let's see. I bet I can put it in.
See what I can do.
Dropbox. Yeah, GoToWebinar seems to be a little different. That other ones let me in my network, but this one is not allowing it.
Okay. No worries. I do have it here in my email, so let me see if I can pull it up. Again, folks, I'm sorry, my internet's a little spotty. These are the times that we live in. So let me pull it up for you. I have it right here, so I'll just pull it up. You'll just have to say next slide for me. Let me get it downloaded here. And there we go. I will take the controls back as soon as it's finished loading here. And slideshow. Here we go. We got it figured out here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and show my screen, and we'll get moving. Thanks, everyone, for your patience. Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon. Can everyone hear me? I hope so. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're viewing from. Thank you guys for your patience, and what a way to think on your feet. Have to do so during these times of technology. You never know what's going to happen. Welcome to the Resilience in Vulnerable Communities webinar. Today, we are going to discuss the preservation of Gullah Geechee community on Hilton Head Island. Next slide. I am Sheryse DuBose. I am the Historic Neighborhoods Preservation Administrator for the Town of Hilton Head Island. I've been with the town for a year and a half. To sum it up, my job is to oversee preservation efforts in Hilton Head's historic communities, which houses Gullah landowners, also called Native Islanders. I received my undergraduate degree in political science from Hampton University, where I began my love of urban planning from a course that I took in urban politics. Then I also interned at Penn Center, or the Penn School, which was an early institution of learning for newly emancipated freedmen, and now a cultural center for the preservation of Gullah culture and history. I received my master's degree in urban and regional planning from the University of New Orleans and a PhD from the University of Tennessee with an emphasis in cultural studies. What's important to mention about me is that I grew up on Hilton Head Island. I am a member of one of the largest extended Gullah families on Hilton Head. So it will be interesting to know at some point if there are other planners out there who plan for an indigenous community of which they are a part. Something to think about. At this point, I am going to ask my colleague to please introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Jamie Lopko. I am a native of Cincinnati, Ohio, one of the many Ohioans that found their way to Hilton Head Island. I graduated with a Bachelor's of Urban Planning from the University of Cincinnati. And I moved around a bit. I started out working in my career at Marion County in Florida, and then moved back to the Midwest and spent several years at the village of Matteson on the south side of Chicago. And I have spent the last 16 years working for the town of Hilton Head Island.
So today we have 3 objectives. I put them here to keep us focused because it's easy to get into the weeds on any one of these topics. I'm happy to share any references if you want to learn more about anything discussed here today. So today we will be learning about Hilton Head Island's indigenous community, understanding the challenges to sustaining Gullah culture on Hilton Head Island, learn efforts made towards balancing planning practices with sustaining Gullah traditions. Next slide. Next slide, please. We will start with a brief history about the origins of Gullah people, then briefly discuss the culture so you'll know why it's important to preserve the community that is left on Hilton Head Island, how Gullah people acquire their property, and the challenges faced with keeping their property. We will conclude with the efforts between the town of Hilton Head Island and the Gullah community towards resolving these challenges. Next slide, please. To begin, we'll start with the history of Gullah people. I have posted pictures here of a map of what Hilton Head Island looked like in the 1860s. That's on your top right corner. A map of the Mitchellville community, which I will talk a little bit more about later, and the cabins the people used to live in the Mitchellville. Next slide, please. West Africans that were enslaved and brought to the United States were specifically selected from those regions for their rice growing skills. They were brought to the Sea Islands that stretched from North Carolina to Florida. You can see this on the bottom map. This is now called the Gullah Geechee Heritage Corridor. I don't know if anybody's ever traveled. The Sea Islands were isolated. To get an idea of how isolated these Sea Islands are, I flew to Hilton Head once, and on approach, I could see from overhead the winding rivers and tributaries and marshes that must have made it difficult to get to these islands, and I could see for myself why they are isolated. The enslaved worked on plantations on these islands, while the plantation owners remained on the mainland away from the heat and insects. If you look at the map, you can see South Carolina and Georgia, for example, in comparison to West Africa. They're almost exactly across from each other. And you can see why the climate is so similar and why the enslaved on these plantations were skilled in growing rice and indigo in addition to cotton. The isolation of these islands led to establishing the Gullah culture, which derives from West African culture and traditions. We will get into the specifics of that in just a moment. Next slide, please. We discussed the settlement of the Sea Islands, but let's talk about settling Hilton Head Island in particular. There were the enslaved Africans on this island, but the Civil War also brought an influx of freedmen to Hilton Head. My family in particular talks about the story of fleeing the Union soldiers on the mainland and swimming first to Pinckney Island and then arriving on Hilton Head Island to reach freedom. Those who fled were called the Contraband of War, and they settled in Mitchellville, which was the first free settlement for formerly enslaved people. We saw the photographs of Mitchellville a few slides back. We planners should be interested in Mitchellville because they established their own town with cabins lining the streets in a grid pattern, and they even also had their own government. Gullah landowners, also called Native Islanders, settled into the 14 communities shown on the map. Each of these communities were known for a certain specialty. For example, if you can find Chaplain on the map, My father's family came from this farming and fishing community, and if you can see it, you can see its relationship to the beach and to Broad Creek, which runs through the center of Hilton Head. He still has my grandfather's hand-woven cast net hanging in the garage. There's at least one person in the community, each of these communities known for their essential skills, such as a blacksmith or a medicine man. These communities also contained a praise house where Gullah people worshiped and a neighborhood school. Next slide, please. So after the Civil War, you had all of these formerly enslaved people, and there was a matter of the big question: what do you do with them? How do you settle what used to be 3/5 of a person into a society? So think back to your United States history class. The answer to this comes in the form of the Port Royal experiment. That is, providing opportunities for education and purchasing land. While I can talk about both answers at length, we will focus on how freedmen got their property in the first place. It was one of these 5 ways, which I'll touch upon briefly. The first way was the direct sales tax. Freedmen were able to purchase 2,000 acres of the 76,775 acres of the land that was seized in Beaufort County for delinquent taxes. Secondly, another way was the preemption, which mirrored the Homestead Act that they did out in the Western United States territories. And this is where 16,000 acres of the property were on sale for $1.25. So there's an asterisk next to this because this benefited Hilton Head Native Islanders specifically. The Philbrick experiment is where Edward Philbrick brought a plantation for freedmen to work after emancipation. So he refused to comply with government regulations that went with running a plantation and ended up selling 4,000 acres of that property to Gullah prospectors. The South Carolina Reconstruction Program allowed Black landowners to purchase 44,599 acres. And field order number 15, also commonly known as 40 acres of a mule, was where a single male could receive 40 acres under this program. And if he were a veteran, he would receive 80 acres of property. So under this program, a total of 2,000 acres were provided. This also has an asterisk next to it because Native Islanders on Hilton Head also benefited from this order. Now, while this seems like a lot of acres for Gullah landowners to make a start towards the American dream of land ownership, this was actually fewer acres than originally promised. But Native Islanders on Hilton Head settled into these 14 communities, as previously mentioned, and had their own lifestyle. So just as it was traditionally done in West Africa, extended families live communally, meaning that they live on the same parcel or adjacent parcels on family land. And as family is passed down through each of the generations and without a probated will, the heirs had joint shares in the property, meaning they own the shares collectively. They own the property all together. This is called heirs property, which will be explained further in the presentation. One piece of property could have 100 heirs owning that same piece. The problem with heirs property is what causes Gullah landowners to lose their land, because if one heir decides to sell the property, a judge can force the sale of the entire parcel. I could spend a whole hour talking about heirs property, but we'll continue. So after the Civil War, Gullah-owned property on Hilton Head Island totaled 2,511 acres. Property was lost in several ways. The heirs property issue that was just discussed will be detailed further. So that was the first way. Another way is the outright sale from the property when the owner doesn't realize that land in itself is its own value. And high taxes, which is something we're still dealing with as well, due to the surrounding development on Hilton Head Island, the higher value of land. So as of 2017, only 1,016 acres of Gullah-owned land is left on Hilton Head Island, and unfortunately, that number has since decreased in the last 3 years. Next slide, please. So Gullah is a Creole of West African and English language. When I was growing up, people used to say they speak Geechee, which was thought of as a derogatory term. It meant that they spoke in broken English, but it's not. It's a real language. They even teach Gullah at Harvard. Gullah are people who come from South Carolina. So that refers to South Carolina people, and Geechee are from the Sea Islands in Georgia. So Geechee people are named for the Ogeechee River in Georgia. Although when I was in Hampton, I would say I'm from Hilton Head, South Carolina, and people would say, oh, you're one of the rice-eating Geechee girls. Yes, I am, especially red rice. I even heard, I heard the speak even before moving to Hilton Head Island permanently. When I was young, my dad would say to me, you got up at 4 in the morning. I never bothered to break the speech down until I was older. All I knew is that he told me that I got up really early. Worship took place in the praise houses, the places that I mentioned a few slides back. There are 5 historic Gullah churches on Hilton Head Island. The one I am affiliated has roots in Christ Church in Philadelphia and connections to Charleston Emmanuel AME, Mother Emmanuel. We all know the connection with that, with the tragedy that happened there. Music has its own rhythmic clapping and stomping that's similar to West African tribes, and you can see these performances during the Gullah celebrations. Arts consist of the woven sweet baskets. You've probably seen them, especially if you go to Charleston to the market. My great aunt had that skill also. My mom, who was from Providence, actually got pretty good at it too. And I tried to do it once and ended up stabbing myself with the weaving bone. So yeah, that talent doesn't exactly lie with me. Quilts are also parts of arts and crafts. My grandmother sewed a quilt for each great-grandchild when she was still alive. So the one that's in the picture belongs to my son. Food consists of seafood, of course, we live by the ocean, yams, okra, rice, red rice, which is my favorite, and other staples. Next slide, please. So we'll move on towards the challenges to Gullah land retention, development, and sustainability. Next slide, please. So the first gated community on Hilton Head Island was established in 1956, the popularly known Sea Pines Plantation. It's the one with the iconic red and white lighthouse during the golf tournaments. The bridge that connects the mainland was also built in 1956. As more of these gated communities went up, Native Islanders saw fewer places on the island they were able to access. I moved to Hilton Head Island permanently and saw it for myself, the population boost that occurred in the 1980s. And Hilton Head Island became incorporated as a town in 1983. Hilton Head Island is a limited services government. What does that mean? Well, imagine a town within a town. That's what these gated communities had. They have their own emergency services, own access to water, access to sewer, paved roads, for example. And the areas that are outside of the gates are, well, we're on septic. We have access to sewer now, but they were on septic. There were still dirt roads. And as the value of property went up with the increased development, so did the property taxes, making it difficult for Native Islanders to remain on Hilton Head. So now at this point, I am going to turn the presentation over to Jamie, who will continue the discussion on the challenges and the Native Islanders sustainability effort. Jamie?
Thank you, Sheryse, for all that great information. I'm going to continue with our development challenges and then cover some of what the town is working towards resolution. So once Hilton Head Island gained a bridge and development started, there was really no stopping the growth. This map illustrates 10 large-scale planned unit developments that take up about 70% of the land mass on the island. The tan areas of the map represent the 10 PUDs, and the pink area represents the historic Gullah neighborhoods that Sheryse referred to. The PUDs were constructed by developers who installed all the necessary infrastructure for development, including the roads, water, sewer, drainage. And the names of most of these communities contain the word plantation, and most are gated to restrict access. So while the gates still remain today, the use of the word plantation has become less common, with most just dropping the word from their name of the development. So the remaining areas of the island that are outside the gates didn't have the same opportunity to have a developer come in and pay for and install all the necessary infrastructure for what currently exists on the property or for future development. This included the Gullah community that lives on the island, who've used wells and septic tanks for service and dirt roads for access to their properties. Next slide, please. So the lack of infrastructure is just one of the many challenges for the Gullah community with regard to the development, use, and even living on the land that the families have owned for generations. So the town zoning and development code is called the Land Management Ordinance, or LMO. The requirements for development or subdivision of land are contained in our LMO. Development standards like our buffers, setbacks, as well as infrastructure like roads and utility services are required for any development or subdivision of land. So these requirements can be a challenge for the Gullah community in their desire to keep their land within their family and pass it down to the next generation. If a family desires to subdivide their land and pass it down to the future generation, there's no exemption to allow them to do that without triggering all the subdivision requirements in our land management ordinance. And those requirements can include installing the road and drainage infrastructure, as well as the utilities such as the water, the sewer, the electric, the fire hydrants. And these requirements can make the subdivision of the land cost prohibitive for the Gullah families and prevent them from being able to divide and share the land among family members. So there is a desire for the Gullah families to be able to do what would basically be called a paper subdivision, which would allow the family to subdivide the land on paper and deed it to other family members without having to comply with the development standards of the land management ordinance. So we've had many requests from Gullah families to just divide their property and give a piece of it to their son or their daughter. And unfortunately, right now, that can't be done under the current regulations without complying with the subdivision standards. And so the town's beginning to address this desire with the family subdivision application that will be discussed later. Heirs property has been stated as a challenge, but what is heirs property? Heirs property is a property without a clear title of ownership. And this occurs when a property owner passes away without a will declaring who the property will be passed on to. In this instance, the property would pass on to all living family members and each would own a percentage of the property. Now, that doesn't mean that the property will be subdivided and each will get their share. It means this one property will be divided among sometimes over 100 people and each will receive a percentage that sometimes can be less than 1%. So this can make it very challenging to do anything with the property, including figuring out who will pay the taxes. And so heirs property isn't just a challenge for retaining ownership of the land, it can be a challenge for the development and use of the land. So without a clear title to the property, families can't apply for a mortgage to build a house or receive any help from a public agency like FEMA after a disaster. Heirs property can also prevent the subdivision of the property, whether it's for a development or for the division of land among family members. Families who own heirs property typically place manufactured homes on the property because these homes can be purchased for a lower cost and may not require a loan. They also may require less infrastructure than a stick-built single-family home. And the town's land management ordinance allows for the placement of multiple manufactured homes on a property without the need for the subdivision of land, and there may be less development standards for this type of application. This allows for multiple family members to place a home and live on the property. The town's beginning to address additional options that would provide flexibility in these type of situations with the family compound application that also will be discussed later. Next slide, please. All right, now that we've discussed the challenges for our Gullah community on Hilton Head Island, let's take a look at things the town is doing to work towards resolution. I will cover some of the many ways the town's working towards resolution, including plans that we've adopted over the years. Recent workforce housing initiatives, the creation of a town task force to preserve the Gullah culture, our education opportunities, and the creation of a new town staff position. So let's get started with the adopted plans. Next slide. So the town's divided into 6 wards, and each of those wards has a town council member elected to represent the residents of that ward. In 1983, when the town was incorporated, Ward 1 comprised areas outside the gated communities and most of what you saw of the historic Gullah neighborhoods. So since these areas were not part of a planned unit development, a master plan of the area was needed to help guide the growth and development. So in 1999, the Ward 1 Master Land Use Plan was adopted. The purpose of this plan was to develop land use strategies for the undeveloped areas of Ward 1. This was not your typical master plan that focused solely on land use. This plan focused on the future pattern and density of land uses, as well as economic development, community character, cultural resources, natural resources, public services and facilities, housing, and residents' desires. The recommendations that came from this plan include the town's land management ordinance to better meet the desired land use and patterns of the community, capital improvements within Ward 1 to provide public services and facilities necessary for the development of property, and creating 2 initiative area plans to look at the needs for those specific locations. So in 2002 and 2003, the Stony and Chaplin initiative area plans were adopted to develop land use provisions with associated density and determine infrastructure and services needed to accomplish the goals and needs for these specific areas of Hilton Head Island. They focused on the appropriate land use, density, and infrastructure improvements in Chaplin and Stony initiative areas, since other components were already outlined in the Ward 1 plan. So in each initiative plan, needs were identified, goals were established to meet those needs, and implementation strategies were developed to guide the town in accomplishing the goals. So the many goals and strategies that we have from the Ward 1, Chaplin, and Stony plans have been used by the town to guide policy decisions, capital improvement projects, and development regulation changes. So as in most communities, the town is required to have a comprehensive plan, with a review and update of that every 5 years and a complete rewrite every 10 years. The town has been in the process of rewriting our comprehensive plan, and it was recently adopted in 2020. The new plan, called Our Plan 2020-2040, Reinventing Sustainability Again, was developed over several years with a large community engagement effort, resulting in a plan that will guide the town through the next 20 years. Our plan contains 7 core values, many of which touch on the importance of cultural and heritage to the island. Next slide. Another important topic that appears in multiple core values in our plan is workforce of the island and housing for that workforce. So I wanted to take just a couple of minutes and talk about the workforce housing initiatives that the town has recently put in place. So workforce housing for us is for rental units, 60 to 80% of the area median income, and for ownership, it's 80 to 100% of the area median income. And so workforce availability with the focus on workforce housing and transportation was identified as a key priority of our town council several years ago. In August of 2018, the town hired a consultant to draft a workforce housing strategic plan with goals, objectives, and policies for workforce housing. And in November of 2019, town council accepted this plan and approved a policy framework for a workforce housing program. The workforce housing policy included incentives and programs which promoted commercial conversion, a sliding scale density bonus program linking the amount of workforce units to the amount of bonus, and criteria and conditions where the incentives and programs will be applied. So this policy was used by staff to draft changes to our town's land management ordinance to create a workforce housing program and incentives for the development of workforce housing. 2 incentives that have been created are commercial conversion and density bonus. So commercial conversion is the conversion of non-residential square footage or a mixed-use development to residential, with the density being based on the existing gross floor area of the existing building. There are minimum unit sizes provided in our land management ordinance to give the developer flexibility to choose the size and type of units that they want to place within the building footprint. And there are 2 incentives available if 20% or more of the total units are workforce housing. The overall size of the units can be smaller, as well as they have the addition of 2 units that are a micro efficiency or a studio, and those are only allowed to be used if workforce housing is provided. And these smaller units, as well as the smaller size types of units, allow the owner to include a higher number of units within the building. Now, the density bonus is an increase in the number of units permitted on the site in order to provide an incentive for the construction of workforce housing. and the town created 2 tiers of bonus density for the property owner or developer to apply for. First, they can receive up to 100% bonus density if 50% of total units within the development are workforce housing. The second, they can receive up to a 50% bonus if 25% of the total units within the development are workforce housing. And at this point, the density bonus incentive isn't available island-wide. However, we will continue to monitor both the need for and development of workforce housing. Now, these incentives are important in providing more housing for the workforce on the island, and this can be both an asset and an economic opportunity for some property owners in the Gullah community. Next slide, please. So the next step in working towards resolution is a dedicated group of area residents tasked to find solutions to challenges that face the Gullah community. To do this, our town council created the Gullah Geechee Land and Cultural Preservation Task Force. We'll just call them the task force or the Gullah Task Force. So the task force is made up of 3 members of our planning commission, 3 representatives of the Gullah community, and 3 members of organizations that have a mission concerning the Gullah culture. So the Gullah Task Force began meeting in July of 2017 with a goal to identify and assist in the preservation of the Gullah culture for the purpose of detecting and resolving issues specific to its community, including, without limitation, heirs property, taxes and land use, and economic and sustainability issues for an improved quality of life through ongoing educational programs, workshops, and seminars. The task force made several recommendations to town council in their efforts to preserve and grow the Gullah culture. These recommendations included creating a new town staff position to act as a liaison between the town and the Gullah community, encouraging the town to create partnerships with and support existing nonprofit organizations that represent the Gullah community, investigating options to change our land management ordinance to assist in dealing with heirs property issues, and investigating options to resolve fairness in taxation. So in order to gauge how much property was still in Gullah hands, town staff worked with the task force to identify all properties on the island that are still owned by Gullah families. So we sifted through over 3,000 parcel owners to pick only those still owned by a Gullah family. We found that just over 900 properties totaling 1,016 acres remain owned by Gullah families. So with this information, we worked with Beaufort County to identify Gullah-owned properties that were delinquent on their property taxes. We passed this information on to Gullah organizations in the community so they can reach out to those families to see if they need assistance in paying their property taxes. If help was needed, the organizations and other members of the community worked to raise those funds to pay those taxes so properties were not lost in the tax sale. Now, tax notices are only sent to the address of record registered to the property, which can sometimes be a person who is deceased or lives out of town or even out of state. So sometimes families living on the land may be unaware the taxes have not been paid and were in danger of losing their land. And so the importance of that is the Gullah culture is really tied to their land, so we need to ensure the properties are not lost in the tax sale. And so this will continue to be an ongoing effort with the town that has been done over the past 3 years. Next slide, please. So another effort by the town to raise awareness of the Gullah community was to map the historic Gullah neighborhoods on the island and place 12 signs that identify these neighborhoods. Now, examples of these signs you can see on the map. So the Gullah community identified properties that were located in each of these neighborhoods and provided that information to the town, where we used it to create a map in our GIS software. And this has allowed us to utilize the information for projects and maps that concern these neighborhoods. The town worked with the community to design these signs and that contain a common symbol as well as colors that represent the Gullah culture. The sign design was taken to a community meeting held by the Gullah Task Force to get input from the community on both the proposed design as well as the location for the signs. The signs were installed along roadways in visible locations to let passersby know that they are entering a historic Gullah neighborhood. The town also worked with the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor Commission to get permission to install a Cultural Heritage Corridor sign along the main road as you come onto the island. Next slide, please. So the signs are just one of the many efforts the town has taken to provide awareness and education on the Gullah culture. And providing education to the Gullah community has become an important to assist them in both retaining their land and the development and use of their property. The Gullah Task Force has held many community meetings, both to provide education and gather input from the community. Topics they've covered include clearing heirs property titles, LMO regulations, water and sewer services, impact fees, fire hydrants and water supply, dirt road paving, property tax information, marketing information from our chambers of commerce, and nonprofit organizations in the community that deal with the Gullah culture and heritage. In addition, the town and the Beaufort County held a property tax workshops for residents to learn about tax exemptions available to help lower their taxes, the process the county uses for property appraisals, which will determine the value of their property, the timeline and penalties for property tax delinquency, including both the process for mailed notices, posted notices, as well as the last date to pay your taxes so the property does not go to tax sale. We talked about the process of the tax sale, where properties with unpaid taxes are auctioned off, and then the opportunity that the property owners have to redeem that property after the tax sale to buy back the property that's been sold, and they have to do that within a year of the tax sale. The town also partnered with 2 local nonprofit organizations to hold multiple heirs property seminars, and we included an oyster roast along with that to encourage attendance. The seminars provided education on the importance of wills, how to clear title to heirs property, and forestry opportunities. The Center for Heirs Property Prevention out of Charleston, South Carolina provides those workshops and also provides free simple will clinics and a free hour of legal consultation with an attorney to discuss heirs property issues. And the town will continue to look for other organizations to partner with to provide education and services that benefit the community. To assist with the ongoing education efforts and provide a liaison between the Gullah community and the town, the Historic Neighborhoods Preservation Administrator position was created. And I'll provide more detail on that in a later slide. Next slide, please. Another step in working towards resolution is to work with the task force and the community to gather concerns for the preservation of the culture and come up with ways to possibly address them. To assist with this, in 2018, the town issued a request for proposals, or RFP, to hire a consultant to provide sustainable ideas to address various topics related to heirs property and the preservation of the Gullah culture. The consultant team was asked to evaluate topics that had been identified by the Gullah community, like appropriate uses and density for their property, setbacks and buffer requirements for a family subdivision or heirs property, ways to permit a subdivision of family property like a paper subdivision, flexibility in design standards for culturally significant properties that fall within the town's corridor overlay district, which will control the design standards such as materials and colors that are used in the development, signage for economic endeavors promoting Gullah culture, transfer of density rights between properties, and exemption from impact fees. The consultant held several stakeholder meetings with different groups to gather input on the specific topics. After research and discussions with the stakeholders, the consultant came up with 35 recommendations contained within 3 themes: cultural preservation, which had 18 recommendations, public policies with 14 recommendations, and heirs property with 3 recommendations. These recommendations were presented at a community meeting where attendees were able to vote on each one as to whether they support or agree with it, or don't support or disagree with it. And each vote was shared and discussed to try to build consensus among the participants before bringing that recommendation forward. And so the final report and recommendations were presented to the task force, and after their review, the task force added 2 recommendations, 1 in cultural preservation and 1 in heirs property, which then leads to the 19 recommendations in cultural preservation, 14 recommendations in public policy, and 4 recommendations in heirs property. So the report and the 37 recommendations were forwarded to our town council for their acceptance, and town council accepted the report in 2019, giving the task force, the community, and the Historic Neighborhoods Preservation Administrator direction on ways to preserve and grow the Gullah culture. Next slide, please. As discussed before, the Gullah Task Force recommended the town establish a staff position within our Community Development Department to manage the Gullah program and act as a town liaison to the Gullah community. The task force asked that this position work towards resolution of infrastructure and heirs property concerns, as well as provide ongoing education on property and cultural issues. The position will also establish the town as a resource center and provide support for existing cultural preservation organizations on the island. This recommendation of the task force was approved by town council, and the Historic Neighborhoods Preservation Administrator position was created, and Dr. Sheryse DuBose was hired and began work in the summer of 2019. And I'll now turn things back over to Sheryse to continue our discussion on how the town is working towards resolution of challenges in the Gullah community.
Thank you, Jamie. So to continue, the proposed Historic Neighborhoods Preservation Overlay District was one of the 37 recommendations from the report that Jamie just mentioned. This overlay district was the first recommendation, the first of the recommendations selected to be implemented, and the elements that are a part of the proposed overlay encompasses 4 of those recommendations that were just mentioned. So earlier, I explained that Native Islanders settled into 14 historic communities. This is the focus area for the proposed Historic Neighborhoods Preservation Overlay District. These proposals are purposed to aid in land retention among Gullah landowners. Culture in our existence is tied to the land. So above are the amendments to the overlay proposed by staff and approved by the Gullah Task Force. Decreasing buffers and setbacks, decreasing widths to easement or right-of-way, changing from 4 dwelling units per acre to 6 dwelling units per acre, introducing applications for family compound and family subdivision, which supports the communal living traditions of the Native Islanders that I mentioned previously. And I will talk more about those in a later slide. But right now, case studies show that Native Islanders typically had development standard issues that relate to placing another home for a family member, or the need to decrease the access width because other family members are building homes and need to access the property or adjacent properties. Sometimes the current LMO amendments that relate to triggering building a right-of-way or having to put in infrastructure for subdivided parcels can be cost prohibitive, as mentioned previously. Next slide, please. The family compound is one way that supports the communal living tradition for Native Islanders, and Jamie talked about that briefly. So if you look at this image, this shows one parcel and several homes built upon it. And this requires a 20-foot access easement allowed to access the property. Next slide, please. This is a family subdivision. This supports communal living traditions as well. This property can be subdivided for family members to build on or pass down to future generations. So on the left is an example of the regular subdivision. As you can see, current regulations require that all of the infrastructure must be put in first, regardless of whether or not there's a home being built there. The image that's on the right shows the proposed family subdivision, also known as a paper subdivision. Infrastructure can be placed in as the house is built. So the rest of the homes could be built next year or 10 years from now, but the infrastructure is not required for the empty lots. So this alleviates the burden of one person having to bear the cost of paying for infrastructure for the entire subdivision. Next slide, please. So this is a timeline of the proposed HNPO district and is as follows. Staff began drafting the overlay district amendments in early 2020. It took several meetings of the Gullah Task Force to finalize the amendments. In September 2020, the task force made a recommendation to send to the HNPO district amendments to the Land Management Ordinance Committee. Those meetings were also held in September. The LMO committee made the revisions and passed amendments along to the Planning Commission. As urban planners, you know that in preparation for this meeting, this requires proper notification. This was a proposed overlay district and a proposed zoning change, so about 8,000 letters were mailed, signs went up all over town, and phones in our office rang constantly. This was not unexpected as more people became aware of the proposed overlay. By the time the Planning Commission made their recommendations to pass the amendments in October, there were concerns raised about the amendments raised by citizens and council members alike. Next slide, please. As planners, what do you think the challenges would be in implementing the proposed HNPO district? As planners, this is a question I want you to ask yourself and see if your answers in your head match mine. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
You went ahead on my end. Let me try.
Okay. Here we go. Here we go.
Oh, you got it. Okay. It must have.
Probably
Is
delayed.
it challenges to propose HNPO? Is that what you need?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks.
So the challenges to the proposed HNPO district. This is a large focus area. The proposed HNPO district encompasses the 14 named historic neighborhoods on Hilton Head Island that we previously mentioned. But these communities do not just encompass Native Islanders. Over the years, platted subdivisions have been built throughout these areas as well. So there was a question about whether or not these should be included in the proposed overlay. As planners, we know that you plan for land, not people. So when you're talking about reduced buffers and setbacks and higher densities, there's a concern that these aspects can attract developers to specifically target these areas to build more properties, build on more properties purchased that within the proposed overlay. So there's a question as to whether this would help Native Islanders be able to retain their land. So right now the focus is moving forward the family compound and family subdivision applications of the proposed overlay first. This makes it easier for extended families to live communally and to retain Native Islanders on Hilton Head Island. And that is our focus as planners. Other areas of the proposed overlay amendments, those will take more revision. The land and the people are connected. So if the land goes, the people go. In the history and culture that make Hilton Head Island, it would not be Hilton Head Island any longer. So we're committed to protecting the remaining Native Islanders on Hilton Head by proposing the elements to the HNPO district that would ensure the preservation of this indigenous population. Next slide, please. To conclude, we have learned about the Gullah community who are indigenous to Hilton Head Island. We discussed the challenges to sustaining Gullah culture and her people on Hilton Head Island, and discussed how the town of Hilton Head has made efforts to balance planning practices with sustaining Gullah people on Hilton Head Island. Thank you for listening, and we will open now for questions.
Okay, fascinating. And we have lots of questions. So let me find my webcam so I can come back on. Here we go. Okay, wonderful. All right, let's get going. First of all, let's lay some foundation down. We're talking a lot about family compounds. Do we have a definition of family for these purposes?
Yes, we do. Specifically written in the amendments, there is a specific definition for family as it relates to this HNPO district. So family is your spouse, your extended family, birth children, adopted children is what family would encompass.
Okay, thank you. Oh, this is interesting. Okay, so when the highway came in, I assume that's the Cross Island Highway. Is that the one that we're talking about? When the highway came in, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago. I'm sorry?
Maybe the main road, US Highway 278.
Okay. So it was at that point then that, you know, as development came in, as people came in, that's when you started to see a decrease in Gullah families on the island. Were you able to track where they went are they still kind of local? Are they, in the county over, or did they just scatter everywhere? And is there a way to bring them back?
That's an interesting question, and Jamie can help me out with that as well. But it's all of the above. They have either gone into some of the housing that is on Hilton Head. There are a couple of housing developments that they've gone to that's rental property. They've probably gone to other areas close by, far away. It's hard to track once they've left because those ties have been severed. And to be able to purchase property on Hilton Head is very difficult once you have lost that property, because of the value of property has risen since you've had this family land. So that's why it's important to be able to retain it.
Yeah, a lot of the elders in the community have held on to their land, and it's really the younger generation that seems to be moving away. And so we can track it to a degree through the families, and I think that is going to be one of the important things moving forward, is to try and get some digital or oral history put in place from some of the elders before we lose that piece of the history.
Okay, thank you. Couple questions about cemeteries. So I guess maybe we can even broaden this to say, are there, churches, and are there other physical, cultural places on the island, and how are they being protected and preserved and celebrated? Specifically address cemeteries first.
There are actually 10 Gullah cemeteries on the island, most of which are owned by the Gullah churches and maintained by them. They are mostly, people don't even know that they're there. They're kind of hidden in small areas back in little nooks where you wouldn't know they were. They were hit pretty hard by Hurricane Matthew when it came through. And so there's been some efforts to clean that up and to try and put some signage on them that matches the community signs that we've put out there, to try and make people more aware that they exist.
To that, when you mentioned Hurricane Matthew, there's a couple questions coming in. In terms of climate change and just any other, disaster planning, are Gullah properties and Gullah cemeteries, cultural spaces, are they being, taken into account when planning for what will probably be, future issues with climate change, hurricanes, more frequent hurricanes, things like that? How are the Gullah properties being taken into consideration? And are right now, are there properties, right on the coast, like right on the ocean, that, have that potential to be hit hard?
Unfortunately, all of the Gullah cemeteries are on the water, because that's just how the culture dictates them to be able to get their spiritually back to Africa where they came from. So that was why a lot of those were hit. And some of them have been looking at putting in a bulkhead or a seawall of some sort to try and help with the protection there. The other thing that we can do is help to try and clear title to where, if there is some damage on properties, that we can bring in agencies to be able to help somebody, because without clear title, it's really hard to have a public agency come in and provide any kind of assistance.
Okay, thank you. Let's see here. I'm just trying to combine questions together. Are any Gullah families seeking to develop their land themselves?
Yes. There are, part of the recommendations is trying to not only preserve, but use the land for economic sustainability. So some of them have plans to put homes on there, to participate in the workforce housing effort, as Jamie mentioned before. So yes, they want to be able to use that land for their economic survival as well.
And they also have efforts to have a developer come in and put a development on the property, but lease it to them, do a long-term lease so they retain ownership of the land.
We're going to jump back to 2 questions ago when we were talking about retaining and bringing back some of the Gullah people. This is a comment/question. Have you thought about policies that give preference to those that want to return, that have historic ties to the land, to have a mechanism to purchase land in order to return?
It's a good question. I don't think there are any policies in place that address that specifically. Jamie can correct me here if I'm wrong, but no. It would be nice to have, but at this time we don't have that.
There's a couple questions coming in, and I get it's a little confusing regarding the plantations, which that's another question that I have after this regarding calling them plantations still. How, if you could review again how those were established, and what was their previous historical significance? Was there, the layout of each one of these plantations, were they historically significant, or was it just kind of overlaid and it was what it was?
It started with Charles Fraser. I mean, before he came on the island to develop sea pines, a good bit of the land was owned under common ownership, whether it was for forestry or for hunting preserves. So a good chunk of those pieces of plantations were already owned by one person or one organization. And so when Charles Fraser came in and they saw that development of sea pines could happen, they went over to Hilton Head Plantation. And so it started out as Sea Pines Plantation, it started out as Hilton Head Plantation. And so that kind of started the effort for people to come in and build these large scale plan unit developments. And they were a clean slate when they came in. And so they did a master plan to plan the entire thing. And with Charles Fraser, his thing was, I'm planning around the trees. I'm not going to take out a tree to put a house in. So he really wanted to work around the natural environment that existed there. So he wanted to put a lot of effort into planting sea pines. And so that kind of started the ball rolling with other plantations.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, are there any pre-Gullah Native American claims to the island?
Yes. I don't have the specific information on the Native Islander tribes, the Native American tribes that were on Hilton Head Island, but yes, there were tribes that were on Hilton Head before Gullah people got here.
So we have several shell rings, and there's one property that the town owns called Four Shell Ring. We own it with the county, and we're fixing to open that up as a park, and it says that dates back to 4,000 years ago for that shell ring.
Can you explain what a shell ring is?
It can be used 2 different ways. It can be used as basically a wall or a barrier for them to live within, and some it's kind of forms when they, for lack of a better way of saying it, throw their trash out. It begins to build the wall around them. So they end up getting a lot from the shell ring when they do archaeological, because their trash is in there, and that's where they find where most of the important stuff comes from, is where they threw things out.
There's one at the Coastal Discovery Museum, isn't there? I think there is. I think I've seen it there before.
Yes, there's small tabby existence there with a little bit of shell ring.
Okay. All right. Let's go back to the topic of plantation, the word itself. One, obviously now more than ever, we're sensitive to lingo like that. What is being done on a policy side to change that? Yes, we kind of say, oh, where are you staying on the island? Oh, I'm staying in Shipyard, or, I'm staying here, or wherever. You don't use the word plantation. So are there policies in the works to completely trash it, or is it culturally significant to keep it? So let's answer that first, and then we have a couple more related to that.
Well, we can't, as the town, we can't regulate how private ownership of each of these subdivisions, name their property. So all we can do is try to appeal to the sensitivity of using the term plantation when they're establishing it. But as Jamie mentioned in her presentation earlier, there have been efforts to personal efforts by the subdivisions to remove the word from their signs.
Yeah, some of them it's fairly easy. You have Wexford Plantation. It's easy to just call it Wexford. But when you have Hilton Head Plantation, you can't just call it Hilton Head. And that's been one that you've probably seen in the press, that there's been a lot of people within Hilton Head Plantation that have been asking for that name to be removed. But it's a little bit of a bigger issue for them because it's not just a sign. It's all of their covenants and their letterheads and their cards. And so it's been a little bit of, that's the one that's been, you've probably seen a little bit of a battle on to try and figure out where do we go with that. And like Sheryse said, the town can't really take a role in that because it's private.
Okay, thank you. A question about heir property. What was the name of the heir property center in Charleston?
That's the Center for Heirs Property Preservation.
Okay, good. Someone asked that, so now you have that. Let's see, what's next? These are great questions. Interesting. Have reparation options been considered or given within the historical evolution of the island? Has there been any talks about reparations?
Good question, no. But no talks about that.
Okay. Let's see here. How has the town worked to address equity issues with regard to infrastructure, such as water, sewer hookups, sidewalks? Are there grant programs in place to provide reduced cost access?
So right now, everyone has the option to connect to sewer. So sewer is throughout the island. You just have to do the connection, and that can be cost prohibitive, but there are programs in place to help you pay for those connection fees. The roads, there's the dirt roads have been paved. Jamie can probably help me out with some of the other things that have gone on Hilton Head.
Sewer has just become available island-wide, and the town did put significant funding towards that. The thing you have to keep in mind with the town as being a limited services government is that the water and sewer are not within our control. We have public service districts that are outside of the town that control that. Same with the roads, and a lot of people aren't aware that most of the roads on our island are either owned by the state or the county, or they're held by private individuals, like the developers and the plantations. They own the roads. So we don't have a roads division. And so that's where we had a disconnect in trying to provide those services outside the gates, because the town didn't have the capacity to do that. But the town did provide substantial funding to our public service district to get sewer throughout the islands. And there is both a grant program for those who have low income to connect to water and sewer, and also they have a 0% loan they can do to pay for that connection as well through the public service district. There are still a significant number of roads that are dirt roads, and some of that is just preference of the people who live there. They want it to remain dirt. And some of those, as a matter of the town, still has to come in and acquire the land for the right-of-way for that. And sometimes there's not a desire to want to give up that land for the right-of-way. So it's hard sometimes to get those roads paved. So that's still an ongoing process that the town is willing to work towards, and we're willing to get that land and pave those roads and maintain them for people who would like to go down that path. Okay.
This question, there are some derelict buildings on some of the properties. What is being done to address these, or are they considered historical?
So could you repeat that question, please?
Sure. It says there are some derelict buildings on some of the properties. What is being done to address these, or are they considered historical, I guess, so hands off?
Well, derelict properties is kind of relative. I if they're not meeting code, then of course you have to address that. So I don't know. No, they're not considered historical, but again, that term is relative. I would have to see the property to know, to give a definitive answer about that. But properties have to meet code, so those would be addressed. But I'm not sure how to do that.
The town doesn't have a historic district or designation, so we don't have any really, we have like one or two, like the churches have been designated historic, so those can be protected. But there are no other structures that would fall under that. It is a rare occurrence, but we do have an ordinance for unsafe and dilapidated structures, but there is a process to have to go through to have those taken care of, and it's not something that we have done in it's a rare occurrence that we would go down that path.
Okay. Our next question, where can we access the family subdivision application? Is it on your website?
These are proposed, but there is on the town website, you can connect to the community development page, and it will tell you, it has a link to the proposed historic neighborhoods preservation overlay district. So it'll give you all of the elements that are associated with that.
The link at the bottom of the page on the slide that's there, that is the direct link that will take you to the historic neighborhoods preservation overlay, which is still proposed at this point. So that's why we don't have the actual applications. Once it's approved, then we'll have the applications in place.
Okay, thank you. If we can for a moment talk about public art, and I did see one photo. It looked like I don't know, like a tile mosaic kind of thing, maybe on a wall. What is being done to promote public art, you know, that highlights the Gullah culture?
There are actually exhibits all through Hilton Head Island. The cultural arts director created a historic trail, an arts trail, so you can follow those through the island to several exhibits. So those are available, as well as we're still trying to get up a historic pathway as well. And you can access those through the bike path or driving by. But yes, there is public art on Hilton Head.
There is a mural as well in our Island Rec Center, as well as in our Hilton Head Middle School. Both have murals relative to the Gullah culture.
Great. All right, next question. Regarding development of the workforce housing, how have mitigating the impact of climate change been incorporated, material choices, and elevating out of the floodplain, and its obvious increase in cost? And is the town subsidizing this increased cost? If we could kind of, I know we talked a little bit about that, but if we could deep dive for a few minutes.
Sure. At this point, there's no consideration for the types of materials or really the cost of development. They will have to either elevate or floodplain. We are getting new floodplain maps, which is kind of lessening the requirements, making most of the island a little bit more buildable. So they will have to make flood. They will have to meet the codes, but if they're in our corridor overlay district, they will be subject to our design review board. So they will have to provide the colors and materials that meet the island character. And that is required to be consistent throughout. You can't have one for the market rate units and one for the workforce units. There is requirement to be consistent throughout with that. Now, the town currently is not providing any subsidy. The county has funding available to assist possibly with impact fees, and we are currently working with a consultant to look at a regional opportunity to build a housing trust fund for the area, and that would be the opportunity to try and fill that gap between the construction cost, the market rate, and the workforce housing units.
is good. Do the people of the Georgia Sea Islands have a community development group where they can work on preservation together?
That's a good question. That would be something that I would have to research and then be able to respond to, but that's a good question. I don't have the answer to that.
I think the intent of the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor Commission was to try and help bridge all the things together, but that goes from Jacksonville, Florida, all the way up to Jacksonville, North Carolina. So I think that's an option for people to try and to get together is through that.
Do the Gullah communities on Hilton Head have sufficient data infrastructure?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Do the Gullah communities on Hilton Head have sufficient data infrastructure?
Sufficient data infrastructure?
Talking about broadband?
I don't know. That's what I'm assuming, yeah.
I don't think broadband is as available as we would like it to be, which has become prevalent with our schools and trying to work virtually. There are pockets of the island that lack the amount of coverage that is probably desired. And there's probably also a cost associated with that some of our residents aren't able to afford to do that.
To that, could you deep dive a little bit on how you communicated with the Gullahs on the island, how you were able to incorporate them into the processes of creating all of this great work, particularly in the age when we live with internet? How were you able to directly reach out to them?
And creating the task force, that was our first role, was to try and assist with that. But when it came time to have a community meeting or get a stakeholder group, or for our workshops that we had for property tax and heirs property seminars, we relied heavily on the community itself, because we understand that a lot of people in the community either don't have access to the internet or some don't even know how to use it. So we made colorful flyers that we made copies for and provided them to the churches to be able to get out into the community. We also sent it to other agencies within the community. We have a Native Island Business and Community Affairs Association, which represents all of the Native Island communities, and we send it to them, and they're able to email it out to those who have access to email, as well as help us get things to the churches to be able to pass out to the parishioners.
So there are grocery stores on the island. Where do the Gullah community, where do they shop? Is there an issue in their communities directly with food deserts, or do they have any issues securing food?
Well, it's interesting because the Gullah communities are interspersed throughout the island. So basically where people would shop regularly at their supermarkets. We have Walmart, which is pretty much on the north end of the island where most of those historic communities are. Of course, the chain supermarkets might be a little more expensive, but in terms of a desert, there's access. It's just whether or not you're able to shop at that particular one due to affordability. But the other thing that's important to mention is that not all Native Islanders are, suffering from economic issues. They're able to, they range from low income to higher income.
There are a couple questions about transportation, public transportation, and whether that is taken into account to retain and attract those in the Gullah community. Are there transportation plans, even for the future, as you're trying to maintain this Gullah culture on the island?
We have public transportation on the island, but it is limited, and it's mostly to bring in our workforce for people who live off the island. There are some people on the island who use it. We have recently started a trolley service, but again, that's in our main tourist area. And we've discussed expanding that to possibly include the north end of the island. But for the most part, the Gullah community is probably pretty car reliant.
These are great questions. Can we talk about the timeline for this report? Are there any benchmarks for getting some of this work done?
From the Gullah report, the 37 recommendations? Okay, I'll leave that to Sheryse.
I'm assuming so.
Yes, there was a framework that was established for the top priority recommendations, which were decided by the Gullah Task Force, and there were about 14 of those. Unfortunately, COVID slowed some of those down. If with the overlay district, this encompasses 4 of them. So the timeline was to take us through to 2023 for the top ones. And then for the rest of them, it's not just incumbent on the town to get those through, but the help of other organizations. So we'll work on the rest of those as it becomes available or we're able to.
Great. We'll wrap up here shortly. What's the average age of the average age in the Gullah community right now? Is it left with the older generation? I know we talked about a lot of, the youth flight. Do you have data on that? Not
specific data on the age range. I know we have a significant older population, and as Jamie mentioned, we're trying to get those stories from them before we're not able to any longer. But I would say it's pretty much evenly dispersed, even though Hilton Head has an older population, but you still have younger folks that are left on the island. I guess your middle-aged people have gone other places to live, but I don't have anything definitive that tells you the age range.
Okay. There's actually quite a few questions about folks wanting to contribute financially to the Gullah culture. Are there churches? There's a couple organizations. Where can folks donate to the cause?
There are several organizations. Probably it would be easier if they sent us direct questions so we can give them the list of organizations that they could contribute to, because it could be for something from delinquent taxes to businesses to churches. So there's just so many ways that they can contribute. It'll be hard to just list that in there.
Okay, I think we are going to wrap up. There's still a ton of questions. So folks, if you have a burning question, feel free to reach out to Jamie or Sheryse if we didn't get to your question. I appreciate all of the great feedback. This is really interesting. I love webcasts like this. They're kind of off the beaten path a little bit, but they're so important, and this was a really great conversation. I appreciate both of you jumping on today. Again, folks, we're recording this. We'll post it up onto our YouTube channel. We will also have a PDF copy of this slide deck on our website. And what else am I missing? 1.5 CM credits we have available. And you can find the title of the webcast and the event number on our webcast website, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. So if you're having trouble locating it in your CM log, just head over there and you can just type in the ID number and it should pop right up. So, and thanks again to APA's Housing and Community Development Division for hosting today's session. Jamie and Sheryse, thank you for this for this chat. This was really great. Everyone, have a great weekend. Stay safe, and we will talk next time.
Thank you.